For January 26, Bayou Reefkeeping went down to New Orleans to visit Bennett Price. Bennett is a marine biologist and has some very unique thoughts, ideas, and things to share about reef keeping. Let's go have some fun and learn something with Bennett. Bennett Price, thank you so much. We love it. I'm excited to be here in the 7th Ward in New Orleans with you, to see your tank, to talk about your tank, and to talk about some of what is a unique background that you have actually in marine biology. So I'm really excited about that. So with that, Bennett, tell us what got you started in reef keeping.
So what got me started in reef keeping? Yeah, I've always had fish. And when I say always, I mean since a little kid. My dad has koi back in Maryland that I don't even remember picking out at the pet shop, and he still has them, has moved them between houses. So we've always been a fishy family. I had an uncle with guppies. Godfather grew cichlid, so I've always had a fish tank. My first fish tank had a slate bottom and chrome up the sides.
Oh my goodness.
It was an antique from my grandmother. So I've always had fish. I've always worked in the pet trade as a younger person. And then grew up in Maryland, always enjoyed nature and fish and being out in the rivers and the streams. Moved to Colorado. It's not quite as an aquatic space in Colorado as some of these more
a little landlocked there.
Yeah, sort of get that reverse island fever. But when I was there, I was actually working in a pet store. And a friend of mine was getting out of reef keeping. And I think this is something that happens to a lot of folks. It's where, a good buddy or whomever is getting out of it, and they see that you have sort of an interest. And, I was always thinking, like, this is just so beautiful. And she was like, well, do you want it? She was done. I think they were thinking about maybe having kids or something like that. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And I probably had 8 freshwater aquariums in the house at the time. So yeah, she gave me a frog spawn. I think it was 2 clowns. Or actually, no, I started with 2. Her last clown had passed. That's what it was. So she gave me the frog spawn and some other coral, some gear. And I was like, yeah, let's salt a tank up. And that was probably 2013, 14. So I got her gear, cycled a tank, I knew all that sort of stuff, and got that tank going. And once I had it, I was like, this is it. I had previously done African cichlids and live bears and all sorts of Amazonian fishes, but once you see this,
beauty.
Once you have that color and that movement and the endless possibilities as far as the hobby can go, I told my friends at the time, I was like, and my godfather, who was, a real big fish head, I was like, I'm never going back. I was like, I still love freshwater fish, but I can't, it'd be like losing a limb. It's just like such a big part of the hobby. So that's what got me into it. Someone just handed me some coral one day, and it hasn't stopped.
So 2013, so you've been doing this about 13 years then.
Yeah, about 13 years. And I'll say I've been in the hobby that whole time. How active? Has sort of waxed and waned depending on life, but I was just talking to Chad or Zoe, one of them, and I was like, as long as you don't drain the tank, you're still in it.
You're still in it.
Yeah.
So, influences. Who are the people that along the way you would say are your biggest influences in terms of reef keeping?
Yeah, that's I think, so I just mentioned, I've always had, like I said, uncles, my dad, godfather. I've always had fish in my life, but specifically for reef keeping, when I was in Colorado and I got this tank, there's a huge reef keeping community up there. I mean, there's a reef store in every little town, has their own saltwater store. And so it was kind of cool because there was like a big community. I wouldn't say any one person there. You just connected, and like, as you and I, you're on Facebook or whatever it might be. It's one of those hobbies that everyone's so passionate and wants to share. And I feel like a lot of hobbies are that way. People go to old car meetups and, or fly model planes or go do disc golf or whatever it might be. So there's just been a ton of people, and it sort of just depends on the year and where I am. Currently, you've been a big help, talking about some of my torch issues. Chad and Zoe are a huge help right now. Some of the members from the Reef Consortium, Chris and Josh. But overall, long term, I've had a couple friends who have really been there with me. Some friends still in Colorado. We swap pictures and send things back and forth. But I would say if the one person, the reason I'm in aquariums would have been my godfather, Lane Hawkridge. He was the person who was just passionate. He never, he always had a tank, whether it be a 55 or 120, and he was a real big discus guy. But again, that like pursuit of perfection, which lends itself really well to the saltwater. Always, it's not just a done, and we just look at it now. We're always sort of chasing something, whether it's an F1 variety or if it's this new German import or whatever it was. So that sort of type of tank keeping, it was something that he really inspired in me. And he was very passionate about fish and, like I said, coral and everything else. So I would say that he was the biggest influence if I were to say a single person.
Oh, very cool. That is very cool. I love it when family is part of the influence. So let's talk a little bit about the tank you have behind you now. How big is it? Tell us a little bit about the tank itself.
Yeah, so this is a 75-gallon display. I think we have a 29-gallon sump down here, which is maybe holding 15 gallons. The tank itself, standard dimensions for a 75, so we're doing like 4 foot across. I think we're at maybe 18 inches tall, 18 inches back, I think is what it is. I think it's like an Aquilon, something like that. This was a Petco $1 per gallon.
Oh, wow, yeah.
I had a marine tank in Colorado, as I said, and it was a 75 as well. When I moved down here, it was a lot of logistics around, moving a saltwater tank across the country. I helped a buddy move from Denver to Phoenix, so we had worked out some of the logistics there. 5-gallon buckets, battery-operated bubblers, depending on fish or coral, whatever it might be, heat pads, heat little packs around them. And I think we sort of over-engineered it initially, and we thought, okay, if you go straight through, you don't necessarily need to do all that. So again, my godfather flew out to Colorado. He had a rental car, I had my truck, and my 2 buddies who were living with me as well. They had all the furniture and the clothes and everything else. My truck was saltwater. It was bucket upon bucket upon bucket. We left there, we drove straight through, we stopped for gas only. So I think we were on the road 23 or something hours.
That's a long drive.
We went straight through. It was a thing. So got down here, and again, all these fish are in buckets. But I had connected with someone, again, through Facebook, a local reefer, and I had reached out to him just saying, where can I get saltwater? Because when I get there, I'm gonna need saltwater. Like, where's your local fish store? And he replied, he was like, well, you don't need to go to a fish store. I've got a RO system. He was a big techie, with all this stuff. He's like, I can make, 150 gallons a day. I can have it ready for you. I'm like, all right, man, let's do it. So got down here, and quite literally, he had a 75 waiting for me.
Wow.
We set it up on the floor, and just got animals in it. Had some fresh water, because we didn't bring a full, I wanted to change some of the water depending on toadstools and other things that maybe were putting out toxins and just freshen some things up. Wanted to be able to do a big water change, of course, the next day, depending on stress levels. So had this tank set, had the 75, and then the next thing I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna need to get a stand. And that same person looked at me and goes, well, you don't need to buy a stand.
I got one for you.
We was like, well, just build it.
Oh, build it.
I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, he was a big fan of George out at Coral Connection.
Yeah.
He was like, we can build your stand. So I showed up to this guy's house. He had an in-wall 500.
Oh my goodness.
That you could see it stand on either side and talk to each other. He was building, it was his passion project at the time was building these stands. So he was like, you buy the wood, I've got the tools. And he's like, keep that 75 where it is for a few weeks or whatever. It ended up being probably 6-8 weeks. But he was like, we'll go to Lowe's and get some wood, and then we'll put this thing together. So all this trim and everything.
That's all custom made.
We did it ourselves. There's actually not a beam in this. It's entirely plywood.
Wow.
There's no 2x4s, nothing. It's plywood on end, because this guy was an engineer. He was kind of a kooky dude. And he was like, the sheer strength of plywood's totally underestimated. We can park a car on this stand once we do it. So we went and built this thing. So yeah, 75, it's probably an Aquilon or who knows, some Petco $1 per gallon tank that we picked up. That would have been 2016. And we drilled it. Actually, we might have had George drill this time. We learned from George how to drill. Got it drilled, cut the glass, put the overflow in ourselves, and just went from there. So it's just sort of been a piecemeal project as we go along.
So this tank, this instance of it has been up since 2016.
Yes.
So we're approaching 10 years of age in
Yes.
this instance. I think that may be the single oldest tank that I've talked to. I mean, most people have 3-5 years for an age tank, but 10 is that's remarkable.
I like to say some of this rock has been wet. I mean, there's some of that rock in there is from
and
my
it
friend.
moved
And it's been, yeah, and she took it from the original person, her name was Rachel, who gave me that rock and the coral. She took it from Kansas to Colorado.
Wow.
Colorado gave it to me. I took it from Colorado to Louisiana. Some of this rock has been going on probably 2 decades. So,
wow.
So
That's actually very impressive to see. And look, some of the growth that you have back there
speaks to that.
Yeah, it speaks to that. The tank has been here for a little bit. Let's talk about the equipment. You talked about the tank. You drilled an overflow for it. So you have a sump. Tell us a little bit about what's going on in the sump.
Yeah, so the sump, for better or for worse at this point, as you and I have discussed, has a refugium. So we're growing a lot of macro down there. We've got a Reef Octo. I don't even know what size it was.
Skimmer?
Yeah, Reef Octo skimmer. Yeah, absolutely. I had an older sort of no-name skimmer a buddy in Colorado had given me. Upgraded to this when the pump died. You know, it was one of those moments where, unfortunately, with some of this equipment, if a piece of it goes bad, you're like, you know, I can bid a whole new skimmer on Marketplace or Craigslist or whatever it was at the time for the price of buying a new sort of Venturi pump or something like that. So, yeah, I got the Reef Octo, and then that's all that's in the sump. Is a light from Lowe's just plugged in for the algae, and then the skimmer, and it's 2 chambers. We got 1 baffle, and we installed that ourselves, and that's it. Goes down over the baffle, back up.
Wow. Okay. And then in the tank itself, well, let's talk about over the tank. What do you got lighting the tank?
Yeah, so over the tank, I don't know if it's going to mess with our video here, but we're looking at the Vivis Spectra, the black boxes. So they've got the little timer built in. It doesn't have the ramp up, ramp down or any of that, but I can control the whites and the blues. And you know, being in this hobby for so long, I started when I was in my early 20s. Money was always a big part of it. I know that gets brought up a lot. So I was always looking for something cost effective and something that I could sort of plug and play with. And again, the guy who, I had different strips and Current USA lights and things like that on previous tanks. The buddy who had this giant in-wall tank, he was like, you need the black boxes. He's like, you keep your water right, the black boxes will do it. He's like, you can go high end. There's nothing wrong with going to high end. You get more control. You know, potentially you can do a little better. He's like, but for what you keep and the sort of hobby, how you sort of do this hobby, he's like, that's all you need. So this is my 2nd generation of those. The first, unfortunately, one burnt out. And then I went to get another one, and of course, these Chinese companies are folding.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what the first one was. So I have the Vivis Spectra now, but I got the new black box, and they were different. You know, you could see the different white, different blue. So I had to replace both of them. But that was probably 2018.
Wow. So those lights have been running on that tank.
Yeah. The first pair,
7, 8
they
years.
only made it a year or 2, and I was like, oh, all right. At this price point for that sort of longevity, it might be worth, you know, stepping up to something else.
Yeah.
But I did it again. I was like, give it another try. And these 2 have been running, so I've been pleased with them.
Okay, so that's the lighting.
Yeah.
Just curious, do you know well, first of all, how long are you keeping the lights on? When do they come on? When do they go off? What's the lighting schedule?
So we just had our time change. But right now, I'm running them a little long, in part because my partner, Jessie, she's, you know, loves the tank as much as I do. And I think sometimes I'm like, oh, the best thing is potentially to, you know, turn them off at this time. But we got an 8 a.m. to like 9:30 p.m.
Okay,
like
yeah.
we're cranking through. And I know some of my buddies have always said, like, you know, they don't, you know, 9 hours or 8 hours, you know, trying to be more natural, which I totally respect. But we want to see our fish.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. You want the lights on not when you're not here, but when you're here. Okay. Do you know what your par readings are? Have you taken par readings? No idea.
Clue
Okay.
what they are.
I always ask it. Some people know.
No, and it's one of those things that I'd love to check out. Just finding the par meter and, you know, doing that.
Okay. How about flow? So you have a return pump. Do you know the size of the return pump?
I honestly don't. That return pump is an antique. I'm surprised it's still running.
It's still kicking. All right. But I noticed you do have at least a couple of power heads in the tank.
Yeah, I've got these power heads, and I've actually got a J-Bow gyre on the way.
Okay.
Finally, I'm just like, because I got on my smaller tank, it's fun with the smaller tanks, you can kind of get the higher end gear, and you're not breaking the bank. And I feel like every time I do something with a smaller tank, I'm like, you know, that really was worth it. I should try and get something nicer, because I've got these 2 fixed power heads, and they're just plug and, you know, go. No dialing in, no sine wave or anything like that. So yeah, they're just what I've had laying around. Couldn't tell you the brand name on them, but yeah, I try and keep them, you know, sort of angled, facing one another. Get a little bit of, you know, turbulent flow in the center there. I'm trying not to have that linear flow, as we're all trying to avoid that. But yeah, I'm looking forward to having something that maybe can do more of that wave action.
Yeah. Okay. We talked about the sump, we talked about the skimmer,
Yeah.
talked about the return pump. Let's talk a little bit about the care. So are you doing water changes for the tank?
So yeah, care on this tank has changed drastically over the years, depending on my availability to do that care. You know, I'm doing my PhD right now in marine biology, and the irony of that is, as I do my PhD, and I'm going to get a PhD with, ichthyology being the focus, I have a lot less time for fishing. I have a lot less time for taking care of my fish tank. So it's been very much, I would say, neglected for the past few years. I don't do water changes typically, and I actually think, you and I have been talking about this a little bit, I think my most recent water change got me in a little trouble. But typically I just let it ride. I do dose off for reef.
Okay.
And that's relatively new for me. I've seen the past year I've been doing more of that. Traditionally just being a lot of softy corals in here. I hadn't had a lot of SPS, LPS. In I'd say the past 5-6 years. I really wasn't super concerned about things like calcium, magnesium. But with more of the stony coral going in, I've tried to just keep that in mind and get those levels a little more where they should be. So yeah, all for reef, or that's what it is, right?
Yeah.
The all in one. Yeah, I always get confused, like reef for reef is the form and everything else. Yeah, I've been dosing that. And then just feeding a ton. And like I said, we can talk about some of the recent issues we've had and why feeding's been going up recently as well.
Okay, well, we will get to that in a second. You said you're dosing, so you're not doing normal, regular water changes in any...
No, not in any capacity, just topping off.
Okay, is top off, just curious, is it auto or is it just, I see the water getting low, I add some more to the water?
Yeah, I watch the one chamber in the sump as it goes down. It can probably go a week. I try and do it every other day or so, just to keep things consistent.
Yeah.
So we're all aiming for, but definitely I'll go for a weekend and let it sort of evaporate. Okay. And it's RODI that we make here in the house.
And then, so testing the water, your parameters. First of all, what are you using for test kits? And then tell us about what the parameters are roughly running in.
So that's relatively new for me. In that, my reef keeping sort of methods drastically changed since starting my PhD program. Previously, I would do a lot of water changes. In Colorado, I had a buddy who would literally stop by the house. He was doing maintenance in other people's homes, and at the end of his run, he'd have water in the truck. He would just run the hose into the place. I wouldn't even be home.
Wow.
He'd text me and be like, yeah, I did 20% today. Also dropped in a couple corals. So I used to be very much relying on the water changes, because I thought that's, coming from the freshwater world, that's a major way of exporting nutrients, which in freshwater, you're just concerned with nutrients being low. The lower, the better. Unless you're doing, live planted tanks, but I was doing a lot of, like I said, cichlids. You were just always aiming for 0, and so that intuitively made a lot of sense to me. Water changes are the way to go, and that replenished all of your levels. But then, recently being a little more neglectful on that, I've started doing some testing. I'll go in and see Chad or Zoe and get some tests done with the Hannah checkers. I've got a few of those at home here that I'm doing now as well. But as far as levels, just more consistency, trying to avoid big jumps, chasing a certain number, which again, that's slowly changing as I've sort of wrapping up some other projects and I can spend a little more time looking after the tank.
Are you doing any external testing? You mentioned, going over to Reef Consortium. Mm-hmm. Have you sent out an ICP test? I
have not done that, and Zoe has me convinced I should, and I think I will be. I occasionally would, I've got a refractometer. I look at, the salinity, of course. I don't, unless there's a reason to. There's a lot of testing I haven't done. Again, be mostly softies. You kind of look at the coral and say, well, there, everybody's,
if it's not happy, it'll tell me.
Right, exactly. And I'm like, well, if I'm just topping off the water, salinity doesn't, the salt's not evaporating out, so I never really was too concerned. But if I've done a bigger water change, in the past, you always want to just check that, make sure everything's is working well. And I can take water to work, and we've got digital measuring
devices. You guys probably have a lot of serious equipment.
Yeah, so it's like if I want to just test salinity, we got, I'll pop a YSI in a bucket with my water, and I can get specific gravity or conductivity or whatever I want. So.
Wow. I think there are people who probably would be jealous about that. There's some of the gearheads would be like, we might have to hit you up.
Yeah, it's nice to have that at my disposal.
So what are you roughly keeping the temp of the tank at?
Yeah, so I run the temp on, I use Eheim heaters, and then they're connected to an Inkbird.
Yep.
So I've got it set as my low is 78, and then get it to 79. So that's where I run it. That being said, here in a Louisiana summer, even with the central air going, we can only get this house so cold. So all summer long, this tank runs about 82.
Wow.
And I haven't had any adverse effects from that. I didn't even really realize it for the longest time. I was like, you consider heating. Like, I know chillers were a bigger thing when we had metal halides and things of that nature. But I was always like, if I got the heater on, I'm keeping it warm enough. And again, coming from Maryland, Colorado, that was always the concern. And I didn't even consider how warm the tank was getting. I've got the AC on.
Yeah.
And having the Inkbird this year was when I realized, like, oh, wow, we're getting up into the low 80s. But again, I wouldn't have known without having measured. So the coral have always been responding well to that. And I think, gradual and consistent, that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, there's the thing that I've been told is that as the temps get up there, everything likes to grow, and that's both the corals that you want,
Yeah.
as well as potentially the bad stuff that you don't want,
Yeah,
whether that's algae or
less desirables.
Some of the less desirables. Look, my favorite part is talking about livestock, and you said your fox face was shy, and during the last conversation, he came out and ate some of the nori, and then he swam back to the backside of the tank. What do you got for fish in the tank, first off?
So that's something we've been working on as well. Ida was a big hit for me on this tank. I lost a lot of fish. We were without power for, I think, close to 14 days.
Wow.
Which, initially I was running a generator and bubblers and ice bottles, and there just came a point where, I was working with different groups trying to feed neighbors and put tarps on roofs, and this sort of took a, back burner.
Yeah.
So we lost a lot of fish at that point. So we've been slowly rebuilding. I try to be a little bit picky with the fish and not jump into things too quickly. We definitely quarantine for 60 plus days, and we run copper on everything we put in here. So right now what we have, as far as wild caught fish, we have the one fox face, which you've hopefully seen coming out. He's pretty shy.
At least once.
Okay. From there, we have a sunrise and an orchid dottyback. And those are both, I think, ORA fish.
Okay.
And then we have a coupang damsel who is in the sump right now because we got a biota coral beauty and a biota yellow tang.
Oh, wow.
And the coral beauty came in about the size of a jelly bean.
Yeah, they're very tiny.
So
when they ship their fish. Yeah.
minuscule, which my girlfriend was just like, this is, I'm like, we paid how much money for this jelly bean signed fish? And she was like, this is the most amazing fish I've ever seen. She's like, look how small it is. I was like, cool, all right. That's the way to look at it. She was like, I can't believe how beautiful this tiny fish is. So, we don't, with the biota and ORA and a lot of those folks, they say, quarantine isn't necessarily needed depending on the facilities they're coming from. They try and have pretty strict biosecurity within the breeding facilities. We still quarantine them for a little bit of time, just more of an observational quarantine.
Yeah.
And then plopped them in. And the coupang damsel, it's meant to be
Like them.
Yeah, meant to be one of the more peaceful damsels, but anything in the Pomacentridae family is going to be kind of a jerk. And started going at that little coral beauty, and I was like, well, this is not going to fly. Sorry, bud. So netted the coupang, tossed in the sump, and we're just growing the coral beauty in particular out a little bit, and then we'll pop it back up.
Oh.
But that's also a captive bred fish. What I was told when I got it was a secondhand. I get a lot of secondhand fish too. That's what I try to go for.
Well, I haven't seen the coral beauty come out, but they're beautiful.
She's
fish.
tinier. We say she because beautiful little fish, but typically right in this back corner.
Okay.
And yeah, the dotty backs, they're in and out dependent. And then we also have 3 of the skunk cleaner shrimp.
Okay.
And then there's a couple peppermint shrimp we've added recently as well. They just got out of quarantine as well.
Well, and you forgot to mention your clowns, which I see dancing back there.
And yeah, the clowns. I always forget those two. And they've got eggs 24/7, 365. Yeah, we have our 2 clowns, which, easiest captive bred fish to acquire. Yeah, they're in there doing great. I think you might have heard the story. We had these 2 clowns, and they were quarantining over on our kitchen counter. This was a long time ago. And we had been searching for clowns. But, we like the natural ones. Personally, I don't go for the long fins and all that. And I look at them and I appreciate them. And I think they're beautiful, but I really just love how beautiful this particular little thing comes out of nature.
Yeah.
And they're captive bred, of course, but I'm just like, you can't. I don't know. Personally, I think you can't really improve on that. And we really wanted that like high orange though, because there is some variation in clowns, Darwin clowns and things like that. We got these 2, and I think it was at the aquarium on the North Shore. Shortly thereafter, I was somewhere else actually getting some fish or some fish food and some different supplies. I took a picture, sent to my girlfriend. I was like, look at these 2 clowns. And we had maybe had these 2 for a week. Again, they're in quarantine. And she texted me back, "Don't come home without those fish." I was like, "Well, they are rather beautiful." And I was like, "Cool." She's newer to fish keeping than I am, and I came home and I was like, "Well, another pair of clowns. We're not going to be able to keep them together. We'll be able to quarantine them together, but that's going to be, in my mind, like that's a new tank." She did not realize that was how that was gonna go. So we quarantined them all together. I was like, but I'm not gonna put 4 clowns in this 75. Like the potential for some sort of disruption and aggressive territorial behaviors is just not what I want. And she was like, so what do we do with these 2 clowns? I was like, well, they're gonna need their own tank. And I think it dawned on her in that moment that we're gonna end up with another tank. So we have 2 more clowns over in the little all-in-one 15 in the kitchen, which is a whole other little experience we've gotten through.
Well, it's got some. It seems like there's some planted stuff. You've got some macroalgae growing in that as well.
Yeah, that tank's at macroalgae and some other things. Without a sump, again, my instinct's always been, keep your levels low. That's like the number one thing you read about. When people get a new tank, they're like, oh, these ugly phases and hair algae and diatoms and everything else. And again, my background being fish keeping opposed to coral keeping was always, keep your nutrients low. So I've always been one for macroalgae, whether it be in the sump or in the display or whatever it is, just to keep those nutrient levels down.
Okay. So we talked about the fish. You mentioned the skunk cleaners. Any other inverts? Like, what are you doing for do you have snails that you keep in there?
Yeah, we've got a bunch of snails. I pick up snails now and again if I'm out. And we have like a quarantine that we don't medicate. And I'll throw snails and shrimp and things like that in there for a period of time and then toss them. We got a bunch of blue leg hermits, red leg hermits. No stars or anything. We got the tiny little brittle stars that are sort of more of a hitchhiker, but nothing like that in here right now. No echinoderms. And we had a little urchin for a period of time. I haven't seen that in probably 6 months. So might not be with us anymore.
Understood. And then corals. So tell us about the corals that you're keeping. You said mostly softies, but now it seems like you're making a little bit of a shift. Yeah.
So again, when I was in Colorado, I had this buddy who did maintenance, and he would text me and be like, check out the bottom left corner when you get home, and he'd have thrown in a frog spawn or a hydnophora or some zoas or whatever it was. I had all sorts of stuff there, SPS, down. Recently, this has been much more of a softy tank, mostly because of the need for maintenance. So we've got lots of these like green toadstools. I got lots of green mushrooms and the Anthelia and pulsing xenia, and of course the pallies, which this tank's kind of notorious for its pallies. But then recently, I was getting more into it, and just I feel like attention sometimes waxes and wanes with some of these hobbies. And I was like, we're putting the work in. We got this beautiful tank. We got some really great reef shops in the area. Let's try some stuff out. And I actually ended up winning a torch. I think it's a dragon soul torch. I don't always know all the names. In a little raffle thing online. It actually came out of Wisconsin. I was on this app called Reef Day. It was like a newer app.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things I got on, and they're like, tag 3 friends and a picture of your tank and, enter to win. And I was like, cool, that's fine. Next thing you know, I've won this torch, which I'm like, oh God,
what am I gonna do with it?
Yeah, all right, well, send it down. I was like, I don't know, again, I'm not testing the levels. I'm just keeping a bunch of leather corals. And it did really well. It started growing, and I was like, all right, cool. This is, again, coral's doing well. That means the tank's in good shape. Let's do some more stuff. So we got some Monipora. So we got the Mani digitata, the Capricornus. I'm trying to see, I got to look here now.
You got a frog spawn back there.
Yeah, we've got a frog spawn. We just recently got some of that hammer. Once the torch was doing well, I was like, well, let's do it. And the frog spawn was my original coral that I had from my friend in Colorado. So I got some more of that. So we've been doing some more of the LPS. And then, there's a couple little anemones, some little bubble tips in here. And then I think you probably saw this where Chris, over on the other side of Lafayette, I was talking about getting some more coral because I'm trying to sort of outcompete these pallies at this point. They've taken over the whole tank, and I noticed that the Monipora in particular was happy to grow right over them, and just shade them right out. And I was like, well, hey, this is a method, because I didn't want to. I've read about vinegar injections and scraping them off, but then the minute you bring up pallies, everyone's like, break out the hazmat suit, like it's a meth lab. Yeah. So I'm always like, yeah, maybe I don't want to go cutting everything up with a razor blade and have a CSI scene in here. So yeah, that was my thought. Was all right, let's get some coral that are going to maybe outcompete these pallies. I'm not in any rush. So Chris brought me. I'm trying to think now. Some of the hydnophoras. he brought me, I forget the name of the one. He's got a Mr. Freeze and some really cool stuff. Chris has got a whole, collection of corals. So we've just recently dropped a bunch of frags in there. We're going to see what does well. Like I said, trying to get my numbers in line. We're going to see, like I said, sort of what takes the tank. I'm not one to say I have to have that coral. I'm saying what's going to be happy in here, what's going to have some good growth. I'll be happy with that. I'm much more of the naturalistic.
Awesome.
Let's have a mixed reef.
Well, given that you have a 10-year-old tank, that really speaks a lot to it. Can I ask, so what's the oldest coral that you have in the tank, you think?
I would say there's a few of the Colorado gang, but these lime green toadstools, yeah, these leathers here. And then there's a big, not big, but good sized devil's hand. These are all from a little reef shop up in Colorado. And I got a piece of that. It was maybe a dime. And I remember, I was new to reefing. This was one of my first corals that I actually went and bought. And I was like, oh, how much for that? It's bright green. That's so cool. And they went to the shop. We were all friends. He's like, bro, like, you can have that. Like, it's not a big deal. And since then, it's just taken over, and it sheds, little chunks. You'll see it, sort of cut a little part of itself off and self-frag. And so that's probably the oldest coral. It's actually a bunch of coral, but they're, I guess, clones of one another. That would probably be the oldest coral I've had. And so I've probably had that then since 2015.
Yeah, so 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years. That may be the oldest coral that we've seen.
But a bunch of these are that way.
Yeah, but that's very, very, very cool. So we talked about the fish and the corals. What are you doing to feed the tank, both fish and corals?
Yeah, so as far as feeding the coral, I've been reliant on fish waste. That's sort of been my thought is, I'm not going to dose if I just have, auto dosers swimming around. So this tank, though, right now is going through at least a sheet of nori every day between that tang and that fox face, and they just burn through it. A lot of different types of pellets. I'll go out and buy basically any pellet I see that's on sale, and it's a veggie formula or this formula. A lot of them are often just ground up shrimp and ground up kelp, so they're pretty similar. I try and get something that's a little higher end, and then lots of frozen cubes, probably 2 cubes a day going in as well. So I'm doing like the brine shrimp. I do krill, mysis, chopped seaweeds. Again, I just walk in, I just grab food, whatever's available. I know Kelsey Guidry, I think last name, has a line that Zoe was just turning me on to, and she was like, you should try this out, particularly if you're trying to keep nutrients up. Using fresh foods is a really good idea.
His stuff is all, it's all just fresh seafood that he gets, locally.
I love that.
Shrimp, obviously lots of shrimp in this area, and just grinds it, a bunch of nori, grinds it all up, puts it into packs, adds vitamins to it.
You can't beat that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And actually, he was telling me recently, they're trying to scale up. So like he's doing it out of his home, which is, I'm sure his wife loves. But apparently he's got a buddy now that has like, industrial stuff. So he's really trying to ramp it up. The question is, how do you keep it cool? Because he doesn't want bacteria to get into the whole thing of that. But anyway, he's somebody to be watching.
Yeah, so I'm going to pick up some of his food, I think, Sunday. They've got it at the Reef Consortium. Like I said, I'm just down to whatever, if the fish seem to like it, I'll try and get more, but I honestly get a lot of stuff on sale. If you go to different places, they're trying to clear something out or, whatever it might be.
And so you're feeding what, once a day, twice a day, 3 times a day, whenever you think about it?
Depending on how frustrated I am with work back in the office, it can be a lot of times a day. I get up and I'm like, I'm going to feed the fish. We probably do that sheet of nori over 3 feedings. I tear it off and put it in a little clip. If I think I've got 2 clips, so if I am leaving for the day, I'll put more in right off the bat. But when I'm working from home, I'm probably feeding 10, 12 times a day.
Oh wow!
I walk out and I tap on the canopy, fish come out, and I'll throw a little bit in. I'm not trying to feed them to satiation necessarily. I'm just putting a little bit, because all these animals in the wild are, sort of grazing. I don't have any big predators here, so I'm not looking for a big meal all at once. These are, I don't want to call them scavengers, but sort of micro predators to herbivores. The tank is just bonkers with pots.
There's lots of spots for them to hide. You really don't have a big consumer of them either.
And that's where the little orchid dotty back, at one point I thought, that fish was gone. I was like, it died, and things get consumed in a reef tank, especially a small fish like that. I didn't even realize she was down in, I say she, but that fish was down in the refugium. And I was like, all right, well, I guess you've just been getting whatever's made it through the overflow, through the main chamber, into the second chamber, or you're just hunting because it's just copepods and amphipods in here, like crazy.
Wow, that's very cool that it stayed alive down there. Challenges, and we talked a little bit about this, but let's talk a little bit more about challenges you've had with the tank. And I know you were talking about something you're going through right now, so tell us a little bit.
Yeah, so challenges recently. One of the things I was noticing as I was growing some of these more, may call them, I don't say higher end, but tougher corals, you get the SPS and the LPS, is I wasn't getting really great color. And of course you go to a reef shop and it's the blue lighting and the orange lenses and of course great water as well. But I run a lot of white light in my tank. That's what I prefer, just aesthetically. So I was like, okay, they're not popping, but it's that white light. But even still, it's like some of these things aren't, even if it, maybe it's bright red, orange under all those actinics, it should be a nice deep brown rusty
red,
color,
yeah.
which I'm down with. But I wasn't getting that sort of saturation of color. And I was thinking, all right, so that's what I was thinking. Maybe if my levels are a little off. Started thinking about that. Started feeding more, started dosing. And then I did a big water change recently. I was like, instead of doing this all for reef until it's, water change never hurts anything. And so the big challenge we've had recently is I bottomed out my nutrients.
Wow.
We had some real loss of color pretty much within 36 hours of that water change. And it wasn't huge. I think it was 10 total gallons, but with all this rock, it's gonna be a pretty heavy percentage of the actual water volume. I went to Chad. He tested my water nitrate for 0.0. He's like, that's pretty low, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right, brother. That is low. Our phosphates are at like 0.05, so real low. So we've recently started dosing the neonitrate.
Yeah.
But as a result of that, we sort of attribute to that bottoming out of nutrients. I had, like I said, a lot of color leaving the Manipura, and then the next day, I've got this torch we've had over a year now. It's gone from one little head to, it counted last, it was 13 heads. Suddenly we're getting that, the brown jelly, which who knows what exactly that, is caused by what exact bacteria. There's probably a relatively large number of bacteria that are causing that if, we were to do the analysis there, but suddenly I'm losing heads. And again, you were a huge help in that. I know you've gone through that, and so now we're doing the Cipro, every night. We did a calculation. I can thank you very much, Dave. I'm glad to have your experience there when that sort of went downhill, because truth be told, I've not had a lot of issues over the years other than like hurricanes and equipment failure. And as they say, smooth seas do not make competent sailors. And I think I rode out on a lot of beginner's luck for the first decade there. And now having issues I've not had before. I think introducing so many new coral, the things that were being taken up.
I'm sure that's where the bacteria came from, but it probably was not.
Yeah.
It was in such small quantities when it was first introduced, but then you add the stress of, I got no more,
No new
food.
Yeah, everything's starving.
Yeah.
So that was going on.
So since you've been dosing the Cipro, how long have you been?
We're on day 3 of the Cipro.
And have you had any continued head loss? Or
no issues at all. So the first day, and I messaged you and Zoe and some other folks. We had the one head, and I pulled it out. We clipped. And if you get some closer shots, you'll see I chop that off. Had it in some just tank water in a separate container, and really tried to move it and get all the jelly off that I could. It looked really clean. Now before I go doing a bunch of dips or treatments, let's just see, maybe we isolated the issue and we can move forward. And it went another day. Everything looked fine. I was like, cool. Maybe we the cutting it, I didn't have to go so drastic with the treatment, and it's good. And then the next day, more brown heads, overnight. I was like, all right, it's time to medicate. Let's see what we can do. So since medicating, we've had no issues, which again, we lost like 4 heads in that first 48-hour window, maybe a little more than 48 hours. And now we're going on day 3 of no issues, good polyp extension. You can probably see a lot of things are still kind of pale, but the polyps are out and doing what they should be doing. So I'm really happy with that so far.
And no other adverse effects that you've noted in the tank. Everybody else seems to be like.
Everyone else seems to be good. I know, hearing like, let's dose your tank with antibiotics. Again, my background being like nitrifying bacteria, and like bacteria is all it is. Like without the bacteria, you're lost. You don't want a sterile tank. You cycle it. You're growing bacteria as much as you're growing fish or coral.
Yeah.
So having heard that from you guys, I was definitely a little hesitant to be like, this seems like kind of counterintuitive. But no, everything's been great. It's been really cool to see, nothing going bad. I definitely have woken up in the middle of the night a couple times and crept out here and turned on the iPhone light. And I'm like, yeah, still fish in the tank. I'm waiting to see like a big white cloud, bacterial bloom. But no, everything's going good, which is pretty exciting to, learn something new.
That's awesome. I mean, it's always good to hear the positive stories, even through the challenges.
Oh, yeah.
Because the message to people out there is, we're all going to go through struggles with this, and there are solutions. And talk to other people, get information. It can help you get through a lot of it.
Oh, absolutely. That's any hobby. I mean, I drive my truck. Sometimes it breaks down. I'm not like, well, I just walk the rest of my life. No, you try and get it fixed. You try and learn. What happened? What could I have done better? Who do I need to reach out to?
Yes, that's exactly it. What are your future plans? Where do you think you're going? What's the next thing? Once you get past the Cipro, where are you going to go next with the tank?
I know. I feel like every reefer you talk to, there's always this inclination like, bigger. I want a big tank. And big tanks are cool. Who doesn't love a big tank? I think one of the things that has saved me in this hobby, though, is through hurricanes and other things like that, sort of more catastrophic events or moving. I mean, this tank has moved since being in New Orleans. So I got a house, moved to another place, moved to another place, moved here. So this tank has been drained and moved with
4 times.
Big, crawfish coolers, 5-gallon buckets. And I don't think I'd have done that with like a 180.
Yeah, that would have been a lot harder to do.
This tank, even when there's sand in the bottom, you and me can get it in the back of my pickup and we can do it. I don't need a team of movers. But of course I'd like a bigger tank. But I'm trying to think like how big a problem this can ever be is 75 gallons worth of, headache versus 200 gallons worth of headache. So right now I think we're just trying to get through this sort of brown jelly. I want to get some color back in some of my coral. We definitely had some flesh loss on one of my Montiporas. So I want to see that, I want to get through that. And I've got a bunch of frags in here. Like I said, trying to get through these pallies, get some things that can establish themselves in the pallies is where my interest lies currently. Ultimately, this space along the wall could take a 6-foot tank. I've definitely measured that. Yeah, I'm like, what we could do. And my girlfriend and I have talked about that. I like the size, but I could go bigger. But also, big priority right now is defending the dissertation in a few months. So any big project, we're like, we could use a new kitchen backsplash, or maybe we should take a vacation. It's like, let's finish that PhD before we. I think when you have something so sort of important and difficult, my inclination is definitely like, let's find something else to do. Like my house is never cleaner than when I've got a deadline. I'm like, it's really a good time to get those baseboards spotless. So I have to consider the fact that as I creep up towards my defense, the tank has been a little more of appealing use of time. I could be writing, but probably should go feed the tang.
So we haven't talked about that yet, but I think you're kind of a unique example, and I was excited about this because you're major, and you've used some, I'll call it major scientific terms through this. I don't know if you caught it, but I did. I'm like, okay, he's using a scientific term. It means some animal in there. I'm sure most of the people are probably like, what was that?
Oh, yeah.
But you're studying, you're getting your PhD in marine biology.
Yes.
And in specifics, if I'm to understand it, you're writing your thesis about fish communication, is that correct? So tell us a little bit about that, because I think it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, so I belong to the Fish Behavior and Morphology Lab at the University of New Orleans. I'm a PhD candidate who's intending to defend within the next few months. So we do all sorts of different research in that lab, but my specific research has been focused on hearing and sound production in the family Cyanidae, which you and everyone else...
what does translate that for?
Redfish, croakers, specks, silver perch, kingfish, all the croakers and the drums. That's that family, which is a globally distributed species, but we have a few very famous examples here in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, big redfish, red drum. My first chapter of my dissertation is looking at red drum and their spawning aggregation, so when they all come together to reproduce, in St. Andrew Bay in Panama City Beach, Florida. So we'll scuba dive down, put some, we call them hydrophones, it's an underwater microphone, down in the water, and we would leave that for a month, and we did that for 2 years. And our big question was, are we seeing a difference in the sound level production of these animals in concurrence with, or co-occurrence with vessel noise? So we have a lot of boat traffic, and these animals are communicating with one another vocally. They have they're called drums because they drum. They have a swim bladder and then sonic muscles that run laterally along the swim bladder. So it's essentially a drum with a guitar string.
Wow,
and they activate,
that's very cool.
Yeah, they activate that sonic muscle, and you get resonance within the swim bladder, and that's how they call to one another. And then they come together in these huge groups. It's very, very loud. Work themselves into a very loud frenzy, and then release sperm and eggs. I say gametes, but sperm and eggs get released into the water column, and that's how they reproduce. And our question is, if you're hollering out, "Hey, ready to lay eggs," but there's a plane flying overhead or whatever it might be, you can't hear one another. And the same thing with vessels. You can't hear the fish. Maybe you can't hear one another, but there's too much vessel traffic going on. We don't know yet. We're still doing some of that research. Some of the stuff I've looked at is indicating that there is definitely a decline in the amount of calling that occurs dependent upon the level of vessel noise, but not huge. That's good news that they're sort of biologically driven to still reproduce. But yeah, that's one of my big questions. We also do some lab experiments, do hearing tests on fish, which most people get kind of blown away by. So we'll play noise to fish in the lab, and then we'll put them under anesthesia. We'll hook some electrodes up to the hindbrain while they're asleep. We'll play noise through underwater speakers, and then we'll look at brain activity to see if they're having activity associated with that part of the brain where
sound
perception. It's that eighth nerve in the back of the brain there.
Wow. So, can you tell us, do the fish in our tanks, are they able to hear us? I mean, is that... So
our fish can definitely hear us, definitely feel us. I mean, so fish have a couple different ways of perceiving sound, because in water you have both sound pressure and then you have particle motion. And we talk about the lateral line often with erosion of the lateral line, but that's also, there's hair cells within that lateral line that pick up on motion and movement within the water. It's how fish are able to, maintain schooling behaviors, pick up on predation, orient themselves in the water column depending on flow. So our fish definitely hear us, and it's kind of a little sad. Our tanks are really loud. The natural soundscape's also pretty loud, but we've got a lot of noise going on in our tanks, and we'll record those for base levels whenever doing experiments in the lab, because you need to know what's your background noise before you introduce some sort of stimulus. So our fish definitely hear us. What's really cool though is a lot of our fish are sound producers. So clownfish, they are, really loud. They actually will pop their jaw, and they have a tendon, and they'll snap their jaw back into place really rapidly, and that's how they're producing sound.
Wow.
Versus like that swim bladder we see in cyanids. And there are, reef-kept cyanids. We used to be able to, I don't know what Live Aquarius status is right now, but, you could order cyanids off Live Aquaria. Triggerfish, like we have in the Gulf, we have gray triggerfish, Ballistes capriscus. There's some species that have been shown that they have a particular scales behind the pectoral fins that they actually will rub their pectoral fins on, almost like a washboard, and that's how they're communicating with one another. Some fish snap their jaws at one another, so there's a lot of sound production from different fishes. Butterfly fish, they're another one, and small angelfish produce sound as well.
Wow.
So there's a lot of noise going on just biologically from these animals.
That's very interesting. So I just learned a ton just by that question. I guess that's what happens when you talk to a guy who's got a PhD or getting a PhD in that.
Think about it way too much.
No, but that's still really, really cool. That's still, to me, exciting. The only fish I've ever heard make any noise in our tank is that I've audibly heard is I have a blue chin trigger, and he will snap his jaw, and I can hear that sound, and he's usually warning fish away from food he's about to eat.
Absolutely.
And basically, that's his thing. This is mine, stay away.
Yeah, and a lot of the fish, it's territorial
Yeah.
or reproductive. But, like parrotfish, hearing them crunch on coral, people are using that as assessments of reef health, looking at, what kind of fish are present. And there's studies that show the sounds of reefs, which, it's everything from snapping shrimp. Like if you go, to the beach, put your head underwater and listen for a second. Jacques Cousteau called it the silent world. And he could have been further from the truth. I mean, it's not as, you don't hear people rambling in cars and traffic, but we always say there's bacon. Like the first thing you notice is this snapping shrimp. It sounds like someone frying bacon. And it's just constant. It's particularly apparent in the crepuscular periods, like dawn and dusk. They have more activity, but all day long, snapping shrimp are just going on a healthy reef. And that level of noise is indicative of a healthy reef. And they actually have shown that, larval recruitment. So, when these fish, like these clownfish in here, we've all heard of plankton. So when we have these fish hatch, the larvae initially are plankton, which means they're just at the mercy of the water column. Where the currents go, they go. Yeah. Once a fish is able to move against the water column, it becomes nekton. So once they're nectonic, they're actually listening and can choose healthy reef environments to settle on. And that's not just for fishes, but other invertebrates as well. And invertebrates, they'll choose healthy reefs to settle on, which makes sense. You want to settle in a habitat that's conducive to your growth and reproduction. And what we're seeing is when we have reefs, become more degraded, they're quieter, and so fish aren't settling on those reefs. So there's efforts currently to potentially start playing underwater sound speakers to bring in some of these organisms, because we know, especially some of these herbivores that compete with some of this algae that takes over where coral potentially could grow, are beneficial to coral growth, and then coral being the habitat engineer it is. If you can get a foothold for the coral, potentially you can sort of have these, degraded habitats rebound. The question is, are we bringing larval recruits into habitats that are not conducive to their growth, even with their settlement?
Right. Interesting. Wow. Boy, yeah, I probably could talk to you for probably another hour just about that. I'm going to be conscious of everybody's time that's watching and try to get to our last series of questions.
Yeah.
So we've talked about that. You've had a number of issues here. Mm-hmm. Ida, you mentioned being a tank issue. If there's a power loss, which is something we all face in Louisiana, what is it that you do?
Yeah. So first thing is what do they call them? Bubble buddies, the little bait bucket bubblers. I've got probably a half dozen of those in the house. They're on big D batteries. That's the first thing that goes in. And that's for like a short power outage. Sometimes Entergy just decides, no electricity for you, and so the bubblers go in, and we try and say, like, all right, Entergy, are you giving us electricity back in the short term or the long term? Is it going to be a big problem? At that point, if I know it's going to be, more than say 6 hours, I start to get concerned with movement of the coral and, just general circulation and temperature. I do have a small inverter generator that, it's fun because I can also use it for my fridge, but primarily it's for the tanks.
Yeah.
And the first thing we do is get that circulation pump going. We start getting the sump and the main tank communicating, because I don't want either of those. It's more efficient to get that. I get some surface agitation. I get that movement, more surface agitation. You get more evaporation. That helps with the cooling processes. Typically, when I have experienced power loss here in Louisiana, heat isn't a big concern. It's normally hurricane season, or big thunderstorms roll through, so I'm not worried about the heaters, and those take a lot of electricity. Then these other two water movers are my main priority. I have found that when a water mover goes down, not having that circulation around the coral, particularly with a lot of these leathers, we can have issues with sort of chemical warfare occurring. So I try to keep those moving so that they're not so stressed.
Okay. Last kind of series of questions. What's the best piece of advice you feel like you ever got for reef keeping?
The best piece of it, it's go slow to avoid problems. The slower you go, the less, you're just going to run into frustrations over and over and over again. Let problems work themselves out. It's a very natural hobby. There's a lot of nature involved. If you put a tank together and then you got a bloom of this diatom, or you got hair algae, and it's like, all right, we're going to dump a chemical in, and then we're going to try and fix this. You're just going to compound. You're just going to create another problem. Don't treat symptoms. Just try and let things, tanks are young until they're 2 years old, in my mind. You really got to let them establish. And then the other thing is, you're going to have problems regardless. There's no piece of advice that's going to keep you from having an issue at some point, and understand that that's not a personal failure. That's something that you could have avoided for maybe you could have avoided that problem, but you would have had another.
Yeah.
Just keep watering the tank, keep moving. A crashed tank is about to be the best cycled tank you've ever had.
That's a great way to look at it. And then my kind of last question, which always stumps people, but if you've watched the videos, you prepared your answer. What didn't I ask you that I should have asked you?
What didn't you ask me that you should have asked you? Right, you should have asked me. I didn't put a lot of thought into that one. I guess the one question that the answer I take a lot of pride in is, do you ever see yourself getting out of this? And I would say absolutely not.
It's a really good question.
Because that's one of the things that makes me the saddest about this. Very few things bring me down about this hobby. But how quickly people will, every time I see a post on Facebook or anywhere, and I understand life happens, kids, moving, jobs, but every time I see a getting out of the hobby post, here's all the equipment for sale, it breaks my heart a little bit.
Yeah.
Because this is such a joyful experience. I mean, like me sitting with you right now, I'm so happy to talk to you. I mean, you and I could sit here and talk for days. And I love it so much, and it's such a part of who I am. I feel like brought me to where I am, both professionally, academically. And I see an empty tank, and I'm just like, damn, like, I wish someone could have been there to tell you, keep water in it. Like, you're gonna get through this. You just gotta let it run a little longer. Like, replace that light, replace that pump. Don't beat yourself up, we've all been there. And I really hope, you know, like I said, I've been in this hobby for, you know, well over a decade. I hope I never get out of it, because that's like the experience you have, and I think being able to talk to people, like I've been in this hobby for this many years, that means I've had that many problems. And a new hobbyist, I can say, like, don't worry, like as much as you might think that tank over there looks totally perfect, that perfection is held up by so many lessons learned, often in a very sad way.
Yeah.
So you'll get through it, and I wish more people would stick with the hobby. I feel like there's the longevity on average, like you talk about means and medians, but it's not, it seems like a short-lived hobby for a lot of people, and I wish it didn't have to be that way. I don't think it has to be. If we were more honest about the issues we do in fact have. It's not all Instagram stories.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I really love that. Bennett, look, this has been a wonderful conversation. I hope, as you said, you enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it. This is wonderful. I learned a ton here. Thank you very much. We're going to take some pictures of you.
Love that.
But really appreciate it. Thank you very much
Cool.
for having
Thanks,
us.
Dave.